On today's episode, we're going to talk about things that we learned the hard way. Stay with us.
For today's handshake, we want to talk about acceptance or resignation. So many times in the lives of men, we try and control all that happens to us and all that's around us in our circumstances. However, that is impossible. God's will is above ours, and we need to learn to accept or resign to His will throughout life. Hey, if this is your first time joining us, we're glad that you're here. Please click subscribe if you're watching us on YouTube. Click that bell button so you get notified every time we come out with one of these new pieces. If you're listening to us on your podcast player of choice, we'd greatly appreciate it if you wrote us a review, but definitely subscribe as well. We want to continue to provide you with content like this, with new and improved ways to help men grow in holiness, both in the digital space and then for their personal lives. And in order to do that, we need the help of men like you. If you're feeling called, please head over to patreon.com/CatholicGentleman and discern donating.
Well, on today's episode, we're going to be talking about some life lessons that we learned the hard way. And there's a beautiful verse of scripture that says that a just man falls 7 times, but he gets up again.
That's right. I've fallen 7 times, 70 times.
Yes.
But he gets up again.
So yeah, we're going to talk about some of the things that we learned the hard way. Just sometimes experience can be the best teacher in life. You can learn things from books. You can learn things from maybe wise counsel, but ultimately sometimes it's the school of hard knocks that teaches you the most. So
that's right. And Sam and I are real big on taking action, right?
Yes.
And you have to take action. And in that action, we've learned a lot of things through our personal experience. And some of it has been hard and very much against our will. And I would say for me personally, not talking like just one particular instance on this day at 3 o'clock, this happened to me and it was a hard lesson. But no, like over the course of these 3, 5, 10 years, even present currently in life, still learning things the hard way in the school of hard knocks. Yeah, I like that.
Yes, yeah. And I think too, failure in life, like a lot of times men fear that. But as long as we learn something from it, even failures can be moments that help us move forward in holiness and maturity if we accept them and appreciate them for what they are. So even these hard knocks, these lessons, these difficult lessons that were at times painful for us, they helped us grow.
That's right.
That's why we wanted to do an episode on this.
That's right. And and we have the writings of St. Paul who boasts in his weakness, and we both believe that God can help us grow in our weakness, and it is in our weakness and our failings that we can open ourselves up to Him to make us better in His image, right?
Yes.
In the Imago Dei, not our image, which kicking or screaming very much, I wanted to do things my way.
Yes, right. Well, let's jump right in. Why don't you start us off and share a difficult moment for you where you learned something?
Yeah, so the first one that I have up is going to be kind of a longer one. And it's trusting in God through my career and my finances and my financial self and ability to support a family. And so I very much put kind of a self-worth, I would say, in my accomplishments. And everything through college and beyond, right? So I had to be the best at everything I did. I got full rides to the colleges I went to. And this is not out of any sense of arrogance or pride, because for me, it was my self-worth. Like if I didn't do those things, then I was a failure. And I truly believe that. I would talk to God, but God had to fit into my mold. And it was kind of going to God when I was in need, and then kind of a confused understanding of my relationship with God.
Yes.
And I did. I was a professional trumpet player, as some listeners already know, and I still am a professional trumpet player, but I had planned to play in one of the top symphony orchestras in the world and be one of the best trumpet players. And I truly believed that if I had given up everything to God and just said, you know what, God, do with me as thy please, your will be done and not mine, that he was going to like break my fingers and I couldn't play the trumpet, or I was going to get into a fight and my lip would be busted and I'd have to learn how to play the trumpet. I mean, like literally, this is where my thoughts and imaginations went to, was just that God would have to break me like that. And that would be God's Old Testament, hard will on my life. And I would just have to suck it up and accept it.
Right.
And that fear kept me from, throughout high school and college, and I would say into my professional career, really letting go to God. And with that came a lot of anxiety and a lot of depression. And I have more anxiety than depression, but nevertheless, I would go around the country. I played in the Beijing Olympics in 2008. I performed trumpet around the world, and then would go to auditions to try and win things. And every single time I didn't win a spot in a professional symphony orchestra, I would get depressed for a few days. It was like I wasn't worth anything,
Yeah.
And so throughout that time, and I've been married for 11 years now, throughout my 11 years of marriage, I've gone from being a professional trumpet player, playing in some symphony orchestras, teaching 40 kids a week, to all of a sudden doing directors of sales and marketing for a learning management system company, while still playing the trumpet and still trying to succeed in that. And then, really hanging on because it's still my will, right? And we're talking years, like 5-6 years. And to now where I'm at as a professional marketing individual that gets to play trumpet out of joy and on the side. And I'll say that I learned this the hard way, because for years when my friends would succeed in playing in professional symphony orchestras, instead of finding joy and happiness for them, right, I got sad and I got depressed because it wasn't me. And I mean, years of this. And God has been bringing me out of it because I have my family and my priorities have started to change, and I love my job, and I'm blessed to be performing that work. I love doing this with you, Sam. And I couldn't have imagined what God had in store.
Right.
And if I've learned a lot, I would say, kicking and screaming, I've learned a lot.
Yeah.
And I'm not playing in one of the world's best symphony orchestras, but I'm still very fulfilled.
Sure.
So.
Yeah. Well, that's beautiful. I appreciate that. Yeah, I think oftentimes those dreams and desires that we have aren't always what's best for us. And it's a painful lesson to learn that, and to be willing to trust God as he kind of course corrects our lives. And I'll have a moment of my own to share, kind of similar, a course correction that God made in my life that was painful. But really, my first painful lesson was something that I it sounds dumb looking back, but I'll just say it right out. Don't pay your tuition with credit cards.
Yeah.
So a lot of what they do, these credit card companies do with new college students is really kind of predatory. You're like, you're 18 years old, you're fresh out of high school, and this credit card company sends you a credit card in the mail with all these supposed wonderful perks. And of course, nobody reads the fine print. When you're that age, you're just so young and immature. Well, anyway, I got this Discover card in the mail, and it came with these checks where you could literally write a check to your credit account. Well, I was so dumb. And I was struggling to pay my tuition at the time. I was having to work my way through college, and I had some student loans, but it wasn't enough to cover all my college expenses. So one time I remember going to the student office and writing a check to my credit account. Well, what I didn't look at was the fine print that said that if you used one of these checks, it immediately bumped your interest rate to 35%. So I wrote a several $1,000 payment to my student account with oh my goodness, painful lesson. It took me years to pay that off.
Oh, sure.
But the point is, be prudent, do your
Yeah.
homework. I feel like financial management should be taught to every high school student. They should
Yeah.
learn how to manage money, how to,
Amen.
track their expenses, do a budget, things like that. Because I didn't get any of that, and I learned the hard way
Yeah.
that poor financial decisions can haunt you for years to come. So the main lesson, the main takeaway is do your homework around money. A lot of people just aren't taught, and they make
Yeah.
some really dumb decisions. I made some really dumb financial
Yeah.
decisions in my life. But as a husband and father, somebody who wants to get married, or someone who wants to get married, don't strive not to bring a mountain of debt into your marriage. It'll set
Yeah.
you back for years.
Yeah.
Wouldn't it be wonderful to go into your marriage, your young marriage, with a lot of money in your savings account?
That's right.
That would put you way ahead of most young people today. Now, I understand some people just can't do it. Like, I was really struggling to pay my college tuition at the time, and I know a lot of people are in the same position. But to the extent that you can, try to be wise with your finances. It will really save you a lot of heartache and pain in life if you can just put money back, learn to be a saver, learn to budget, things like that. So that was a painful lesson I learned, and hopefully I can, by sharing that, can save some people some pain too.
That's right. And so there's so many layers to that. I completely agree with you in high school that we need to be teaching our kids.
Yes.
And very frequently, I was blessed to have a mom who was an accountant, and so she did teach me with that, but my wife didn't.
Yeah.
And her parents didn't know to teach her that, right? And so she had the same difficulties. And I feel like there is so much, there's so many companies and in our consumerist culture that are looking to prey on college kids.
Yeah.
And then another layer to this is read the fine print, right? If it seems too good to be true, or it seems, it probably is, right? That famous saying. And I completely agree. I've thrown myself into different situations where I even thought that I had read the fine print, but then realized I didn't. Another layer that just came out while you were talking was have an older person that you can turn to, that you respect, that is wise, that you can talk to about this, and throughout life. But yeah, definitely talking to our high school listeners, college age listeners, 30-year-olds. I turn to my parents all the time, and I'll give them a call and I'll be like broken air conditioning unit, right? And I'm getting all these quotes and learning all of this information, and it's going to cost thousands of dollars. And do I just fix the part, or do I replace the whole system and all this stuff? If I didn't have somebody to turn to that's experienced that not once but maybe 3 times in their lives already, you're walking blind and likely to make a bad decision. So
and also just one last thing I want to say about this is realize that credit is not money. It's not the same thing. Like when I was a young and dumb college student, I literally thought like, well, I have a $10,000 credit line. That means I have $10,000.
Yeah.
It feels like it as a young person, with not a lot of sense. And yet it's not money. It's money that you're going to have to pay back eventually. So just realize that. Don't go crazy. Save yourself a lot of pain later on.
Yeah, agreed. So another thing in my life, and these things are humbling and somewhat embarrassing to admit, but Sam and I both felt like this is something really good to talk about, right? So is consistent and daily prayer. So when I was in college, in high school, I used to have what I call active prayer, right? I'd have my litany of things that I'd have to pray for, right? Lord, please help me do well in this test. Help me remember all the things I studied. Remember, Lord, please this and please that, et cetera. And, and take care of my mom, please. Stuff like that. But it wasn't, it was maybe consistent, but it certainly was just like a checkbox, right? I like going to Mass on Sunday as an obligation is like, well, if I got to get to heaven, I got to do this. Right. There was no relationship building between me and the Lord. It was, I need these things, and can I cash out and get some divine assistance in these, and obviously as your relationship grows with Christ, you still need to constantly open your heart up to Him. But when I was in college, as a sophomore, I was in confession, and I met with a really amazing confessor, and I asked him if I could have him talk to him outside for books to read and stuff. And I actually had never heard of a spiritual director. I didn't know that was a thing. I didn't even know there was such a thing as a consistent confessor. These things were, in my upbringing, not a part of my life. And so I met with him outside of the confession, and he ended up counseling me, and he was an incredibly wise man. Might he rest in peace. He was in his 80s when I met him, and so the wisdom that he had gained, and praise God, he was able to pass to me. But one of the first thing he said is, "How's your prayer life?" And I said, "Well, it's good. I got these active prayers that I go through." And so the guy's like, "Well, no, do you talk to God? Like, do you open yourself up and have a conversation?" And this was very foreign to me. And I was like, "Well, like, what do you mean? Like, he's not really talking to me. Like, you just want me to sit there in silence, like, pretend, make up things in my mind that he is saying to me, And so he said, "Well, I want you to pray daily, but the first thing I want you to do is I want you to pray for 2 weeks. Lord, when should I pray daily?" Right? So basically, if you're just starting out, you're trying to change your rule of life.
Yeah.
You might not realize that, but that's what you're doing. And so he said, pray to God for 2 weeks. And I did. And I discerned that it was after breakfast is when I would sit down as a single guy and I would have my 30 minutes of prayer. And I wasn't waking up consistently every morning. So breakfast was fluctuating and that 30 minutes fluctuated.
Yes.
And as such, I was very inconsistent. I didn't know what to do. So I'd read scripture, I'd read books. I would stop and I would have a petition or a Thanksgiving or something like that, but it was very scattershot. And I went on like this for 3 or 4 years, and every time meeting with him, he would say, "How is it?" And I would be honest with him. I'm like, "Well, there's a couple days that, I stayed up way too late last night and I didn't really get it in, or I only got like 5 minutes in," and stuff like that. And he was like, "John, we've got to work there first. Like, we've got to start there." So we're talking 3 or 4 years of this, right? So then he passed away, may he rest in peace, and I got a new spiritual director. The first thing this spiritual director asked me was, "How's your conversation with Christ?" And I wasn't totally ignorant, and I told him, and he was like, "Well, are you praying daily?" And I said, "Almost, kind of, most of the time." And he was like, "It has to be like the air you breathe, right? It has to be that consistent." Yes. And he likewise was wise. Just get to the end. It took me 7 years with 2 spiritual directors guiding me to finally make daily conversation with Christ a part of my life.
Yeah.
And I did have to learn that the hard way, because anybody who's gone to confession with the recurring sin understands that eventually you start chastising yourself, not forgiving yourself. You start feeling like a failure. You even start, if you're like me, you start trying to think of different ways where you can say it, where it doesn't sound like it's the same sin again that you failed with. And that's what I was experiencing with these spiritual directors, was going to them, once a month and basically being like a failure, like going in front of them and as a failure, not embracing that failure by any means, not, but just embarrassed. And so I can say my life is much greater now that I have prioritized that. And, but it wasn't, it was 7 years of that.
Yeah. Yeah, it's extremely hard, but sometimes, like you're saying, with a spiritual director, you can struggle on your own for 10, 15 years, but having that mirror of a spiritual director who can reflect back to you in an honest way what you're experiencing and hold you accountable can really lead to growth.
That's so true.
Well, my next lesson was that an end can be a new beginning. So when I was in college, I went to a Baptist university, and I considered myself a Baptist for most of my college years. And my heart was set on becoming a Baptist pastor, Baptist minister. Like, I really thought that was my calling.
Oh, wow.
And I was really kind of wedded to that idea. And it's about midway through my college experience, I encountered a pastor that I met through a series of circumstances, and he invited me to participate in an internship at his Baptist church. What did that involve? It involved helping the youth group, maybe preaching on Sunday nights, just kind of doing the work of a pastor throughout that for about a whole summer. So be kind of in the role of an assistant pastor in the Baptist world. So that was my role for the summer, and I thought I did really well. Like I had some stumbles and missteps, but overall, like all the people at the church seemed to really like me. Whenever I would preach on Sunday nights, like people would respond well. And I thought I was feeling good at the end of it. Like I said, I had some mistakes and things that I learned, but I was so proud of myself for really stepping out of my comfort zone and doing what I thought was like really pushing myself. And I was proud of the work that I did. But then after I got home from that internship, I got this long letter from the pastor cataloging every fault and mistake that I did for the whole summer, and telling me that he didn't think I was cut out for ministry, and saying all these like very harsh things that just destroyed me. I was so humiliated. Yeah. Like it was the most shameful, like humiliating experience to have all these faults cataloged, and just basically having him telling me that he was like extremely disappointed with my performance and everything. And I went from feeling great to just being lower than low and just feeling like a wretch, really. And I just remember like just being so depressed and asking God, like, what are you doing? Like, I thought this was my calling. I thought this was where my gifts lay. And like, why are you pulling the rug out from under me? And I was really depressed about that. However, for a long time, I had kind of a secret longing for a more historic form of Christianity, if you will, liturgical Christianity. And I started, shortly after that experience, like re-examining my life, starting to explore church history a little more, starting really on the path that ultimately culminated in me becoming Catholic. But it had that dream of kind of being a minister or pastor had to kind of die first. But it was the beginning of something new. It was the beginning of God doing a new work in my life and leading me in a new direction. But at the moment, at the time, it felt just like humiliation. But God was doing something that I couldn't have foreseen and leading me down a different path, a better path in the end than I could have imagined. But it all had to start with me dying to that dream. And I guess I could have forged on. I guess I could have picked myself up and tried again. But really at the time it just felt like I had just died to that dream of being a Baptist minister. And it was the beginning of the path that really led me to the Catholic Church. So
praise God for that, but that you're here and that you were led on that path. I like how you've said a couple times that it's kind of like the worry or concern of God shattering your dreams or actually feeling like your dreams have been shattered. And I think that's exactly it, is that we set ourselves up with this image. I don't think we can help it, or I don't think we can avoid setting ourselves up from our youth with this desire in our heart, even if we're turning it over and then realizing that desire isn't achievable for whatever one of these reasons. So I appreciate that. So a thing for me, and this will probably resonate with a lot of guys that are listening, is humility. I've learned humility the hard way. I've had to be humbled a lot. So I can remember as a child sitting up in my room, knowing that I wanted something or was going to get in trouble, and I would literally plan out how my mom or dad would respond and how I would respond to them. And if they did this, I would say this. And if they did that, I would say that. And I would make this formula to it. And by God's grace, he blessed me with an incredibly intelligent mom who was always 2 steps ahead of me. And but I remember doing that. And And so there's, yes, the immaturity of youth, but that carried with me into high school where I just had to be right. And that I was so academically inclined and I could do so well that if any time somebody's opinion would differ from mine, I'd be the jerk or the a-hole who would just call out something like, yeah, well, what'd you get on the last test? Because I always aced every test. So, I knew that
You're the kind of kid I didn't like very much
exactly.
in grade school and high school.
Yeah, that's right. And I guess that's exactly what I'm getting at, is that to realize that winning arguments in debates is not the end all, right? And actually, it really came to a head in college when I was being attacked for my faith. And I started getting those Jim Burnham beginning apologetic books, and I loved them. Oh, I fell in love with them. I would just pore over them, and I would just try and memorize them because I just wanted to win debates.
Yes.
I just wanted to beat people. Like, I didn't care whether they converted to Catholicism.
Right.
It was an act of pride. I just needed them to realize that they couldn't. If you're gonna show up, you better be prepared because I'm gonna be. And I did. I would write books. I literally have a journal where I was writing notes and stuff like that, and just kind of preparing myself. It wasn't healthy debate. It wasn't, with the discernment of truth. It was just I wanted to win, and if they could tuck their tail between their legs and walk away in sadness, then that would make me feel better. Then God, that didn't always happen, but I would say that He approached me from a different perspective where. He introduced me to that same spiritual director that I was talking about, who just talked to me about love. And I say often that he taught me God's love. Not that my parents didn't, I had great parents and stuff like that, but he taught me in this situation of having to win debates that the Holy Spirit causes conversion. And if I haven't built a relationship with somebody and tried understanding their position, then it's all for naught, right?
Right.
Then I am... I'm not on YouTube and having a million listeners and I'm doing this, I'm beating somebody more for the sake of people listening. That's not it. There's no some, altruistic or some higher motive or something like that. For me, it was just these one-on-one relationships that I was ruining.
Yes.
And I did. I can think of quite a few that I became known as like the haughty Catholic kid who, in the School of Music, people, anytime I looked at them, and they were doing something questionable, they'd immediately roll their eyes and be like, "Oh, John, what are you going to tell me about, how I need to be a better man," or something like that. And it was because that relationships were really severed by my truth without charity.
Yeah. So instead of the Catholic gentleman, you were the Catholic jerk.
I was the Catholic jerk. I was a Catholic hobo. Yes. I was not a gentleman. And so that is something, and again, these things that we're talking about kind of stick with you, right?
Yeah,
and so I still die to myself at my work and things like that. I'm still struggling with, when opposition comes to me in the form of opinion or whatnot, I immediately go to what trump cards do I have on my list. By God's infinite goodness and love, I've grown a lot to get myself in check, remind myself of my own failings and stuff like that. Take a couple days before responding or something like that, so that I can really see things from their perspective and do my best. And Sam knows this about me, that it's not always easy, and I definitely fail at that. But it's something that still learning the hard way, I guess, so to speak. So
exactly. Well, my next one goes so well with that one.
Okay.
The biggest lesson is just don't be overzealous. Now your zeal was more outwardly focused in kind of crushing the enemies of the faith,
That's right.
But mine was more personally focused. So when I was a new convert, oh man, I just was so zealous. And I made so many mistakes. Alienated a lot of people, kind of like you're talking about, just in my enthusiasm for the faith. But also, there came a time when I was like, I need a rule of life. But I don't just want the basic rule of life of praying 3 times a day or something. No, I want the most hardcore rule of life. And I started looking into all the confraternities and, all the third orders and everything. But nothing was intense enough for me. So I finally found a group who practiced like a medieval rule of life that was hardcore. I mean, everything was regulated from the kind of socks that you wore to...
Wow.
And there are some incredibly holy people in this confraternity. So when I say this, please don't, think that I'm in any way disparaging this confraternity.
Yeah.
It is a beautiful thing, the people who live this way of life. It's a true call to poverty, chastity, and obedience, while still living in the world and not necessarily being religious. But for me, it was an expression not of genuine desire to live with poverty, chastity, and obedience. It was a distorted zeal. And I brought it into my marriage, and I told my wife, like, instead of asking her opinion, I was just like, I'm going to do this. And she's like, okay, like, I don't think this is going to go well, but I plunged in. I like got rid of all my colorful clothes and was wearing like these plain clothes. Like wasn't cutting my hair, trimming my beard. I looked like a wild man.
Took the Nazarite challenge.
I wore this like massive crucifix around my neck. The bigger the better, just to show everybody how Catholic I was. And I really kind of went off the deep end. Was praying like hours a day. My wife's like, I want to spend time with you. And I'm like, no, sorry, I've got like 25 prayers I got to complete. And I it was all based in like this distorted zeal that had nothing, kind of just like you're describing, that really didn't have anything to do with true love for God or, again, an authentic desire to sacrifice for Christ through poverty, chastity, and obedience. It was strictly just almost like an image. Like I wanted to be the most hardcore Catholic I could possibly be. So I struggled with this for like 2.5 years of just trying to cram this into my life and or I should say cram my life into this rule that was, for a husband and father, family man, like it wasn't what I needed at that time. But I just kept trying to muscle it and force it. And it wasn't working. And I tried to, in fact, like tried to get the order to accommodate me at some point because I was so wedded to this idea and I couldn't let go of it. Like I just wanted to be like the hardest core family man I could be. And finally though, like the breaking point came. It's just like, I can't do this any longer. Like this is harming my spiritual life. It's harming my family. It's harming my relationship with my wife. Yeah. And I gave it up. Yeah. And honestly, like I said, it wasn't rooted in anything genuinely holy. It was rooted in an image I had of myself. And I had to die to that image of myself and acknowledge what I was and what I was capable of and my true state in life and my own limitations as a human being. Yeah. And that was a painful thing. And yet, in that, I learned that a misguided zeal can do a lot of damage. Yeah. I know there's a lot of Catholic guys out there who maybe were cradle Catholics, and they're just rediscovered their faith at some point in their life, and they're like, man, I missed out on so much. Right. I'm just going to go swing to the other extreme and pile on every devotion I can possibly find. Do all the things, do all the Catholic things, to the point where they start hurting those around them and hurting themselves and not actually being any closer to God at the end of it. That's right. And I understand the desire. I genuinely do.
Yeah, me too.
But I also recognize that one thing we have to know is that devotions are to serve us. Yeah. We are not to serve devotions. In the sense that if a devotion is not genuinely bringing you closer to Christ, it's hindering your spiritual life.
That's right.
Let it go.
That's right.
Practice it to the extent that it facilitates your relationship with Christ. Yeah. And you're growing closer to Him, and you're growing in love for Him, and you're growing in love for your neighbor. But to the extent that these devotions are just devotions for devotion's sake, they can do a lot of damage if they're not approached in the right way. So be cautious if you're a new convert or you're a cradle Catholic who's just rediscovering their faith. Be cautious about loading yourself down with zealous exercises. seek guidance, like you're saying. Seek a spiritual director who can help you weigh these things and assess what is prudent and what is helpful and what is just a misguided zeal.
Yeah.
We need that external voice a lot of times.
We sure do. And you remind me of a quote that I'm not going to get exactly right, but from St. Alphonsus, where he talks about our personal devotions and practices merit us nothing if they're not in uniformity with God's will.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
And so if we are and I can see myself exactly in your situation, right? Where it's like, I need to be praying the Liturgy of the Hours, praying the Rosary, fasting 3 times a week, et cetera. Right. And you know what, family, suck it up. You're on this ride with me, sort of attitude that I've displayed as well. So yeah, it's a really good reminder. Appreciate all that. Mm-hmm. So my final one today that I learned the hard way is going to be a little bit more practical, a little bit more specific, but I would say it's moderation and in what I ate. Mm. So, it's hard not to go into some of this with a sense of humor now, but when I got married, I got an ulcer. Literally 2 weeks or so after marriage, I realized I had an ulcer. Not because I was anxious or worried, or what did I get myself into by any means, but I think that just that excitement, gave me an ulcer, and ended up having to get all these sorts of antibiotics to get rid of the H. pylori and all that stuff that was causing the ulcer. And it screwed with my stomach systems and stuff like that. And anyways, fast forward a year and a half later, I was hospitalized. I ended up having situations where I would get up in the middle of the night feeling horrible and I would pass out.
Yeah.
And then, so I had multiple doctors giving me all sorts of all sorts of medicine. I was on 4 prescription medicines at this time. I was a walking zombie by the amount of prescription medicines. Yes. I couldn't really function. This is 2 years into our marriage. My wife is pregnant. I couldn't really help her, It was kind of like, oh, you have morning sickness? Well, look at me. Yeah. I feel horrible. And so then finally, I actually ended up having to be hospitalized 3 times, twice with an ambulance that had to take me to the doctors, and a 3rd time where I was able to take myself. Well, my wife was able to take me. And it was 3 times of this for me to meet a naturopath who was really quick and able to discern that I couldn't have gluten and I couldn't have sugar, processed sugar. Like, these 2 things cause me to have all of this negative reaction that causes me to have these vasovagal, these vagus nerve reactions that cause me to pass out and feel miserable and stuff like that. And so I gave up gluten, no problems. And that was, in today's world, we're so blessed. Like, there's everything gluten-free, right? I can get gluten-free everything. And so...
Yeah, 15 years ago, it wouldn't have been the case.
No, it would not have been. That would have been harder. So God in his mercy understood that I had to experience it now and not 15 years ago. So the hardest thing for me was the sugar.
Oh, yeah.
And it still is.
It's addictive.
It is. It's addictive, exactly. And so I've gotten it down to a science where, like, I can have, just for instance, 1 handful of M&Ms, I'm going to be fine, right? Maybe 2 handfuls. But the problem is that if I go far enough distance between the last time I had handfuls of M&Ms, like 3-4 months, I'll have 10 handfuls of M&Ms.
Yes.
And I will feel miserable the next day, And so that's been a cross and something that I've absolutely had to learn the hard way, is just abstaining from things that cause me to feel bad. And I heard it once that people need to learn to practice the inversion, meaning, what could I do today to feel horrible tomorrow? And for me, it's eating 10 handfuls of M&Ms and drinking two things of scotch or something like that. I'm going to feel miserable tomorrow. And if I come at my day often, on weekends when these opportunities are there, with that sort of inversion mindset, and then asking God or Our Lady actually for her help and assistance and prayers to help me not fall in that, I'm successful. But when I don't do those things, even today, and then we're talking years later, I can still have those issues. So.
Yeah, well, and that's a good one, a good reality check for all of us, though, because some of us don't have the kind of extreme reactions that you do. But I think a lot of times, say, G.K. Chesterton once said that we don't often disagree on what we call sins, but we disagree on what sins we call excusable.
Yeah.
And I think it's true because like a lot of people say, well, I'm not addicted to porn, or like I'm not addicted to, gambling or whatever. But what they do is excuse themselves with sugar or things like they'll have like 10 Mountain Dews a day.
Yeah.
And that's excessive,
Yes.
or they'll pig out on sweets. Or maybe it's not sweets. Maybe they just love like bacon. And it's not. It's excessive. They'll have like 20 pieces of bacon for breakfast or something. Where to the point where I'm not prescribing rules or what's allowed or what isn't. But the point is, we'll say, well, I don't have a struggle with purity, or I don't have a struggle with seeing prostitutes or something, but I'll allow myself this indulgence.
Yes.
And they do things to excess. Or phones, like I'll play video games on my phone for 8 hours, but at least I don't have that problem.
Correct.
And it's like we excuse ourselves in different ways, but the truth is, even with sugar, with carbs, with all these things that can be really destructive to our health, smoking, you and I enjoy a good smoke now and then, but we also acknowledge that in excess, it can be very destructive.
Yeah, it'd be dangerous.
So moderation in all things, and that can be really hard when things are inherently addictive, like sugar. Nobody puts warning labels on sugar, high sugar content things, and yet they can be just as addictive as any cigarette or any alcohol or anything else. Like sugar is it works with your nervous system to the point where it can become a genuine addiction.
You're right, and I appreciate every bit of that because it's exactly true. I never need 10 handfuls of M&Ms.
Right.
It doesn't make me happier. Right? It's not fulfilling. Exactly. And the other thing about my circumstance, just to point out, is that I don't have any of the negative reactions if I avoid these things completely.
Yes.
Like God made that clear to me through this naturopath that's been so helpful. I'm not on any prescription medication because of her, yet I still, want it my way, right?
Yeah,
Still having that frustration. So
yeah. Well, the last one for me is just being sensitive to your wife's needs. Like I said, when I first got married, I was such a insensitive jerk, really, and my wife was so long suffering. But it took me. I had to learn the hard way that I had to take her needs into consideration. When I came into marriage, I was basically selfish. I was concerned with my needs. What made me happy, what made me feel good. So just a humiliating example of this is when I had just gotten an office job when we first got married, a low-level office job, and I was on the computer all day doing various tasks. And then I come home, and my poor wife, she had just quit her job to kind of be a homemaker. She knew that was where her heart was, and she really wanted to be at home. But we lived in a tiny little apartment. So she'd clean, but there wasn't much to clean. Yeah. But then she'd make dinner, and then, I'd come home. And I literally, at this point in my life, had like the 50s dad notion of what, coming home from work looked like. So it's like, get your robe and slippers, put your feet up, read the newspaper. And that was literally like my mindset at the time. So I came home, and I was like, I wanted to sit back, relax, read a book, do something I enjoyed. But my wife had been alone all day, and she wanted to talk.
Yeah, she wanted to interact.
So she started talking to me, telling me about her day, the things that she did, where, maybe she went grocery shopping or something. And just was, she'd been alone all day. She wanted to talk, very reasonable. But I was like, no, I'm like 50s dad here. I'm like, honey, I've had a long day at work. Yeah. I need at least an hour to myself to recharge. Like, please don't talk to me. And I literally said this at one point. I was like, can you just wait to talk to me until I've been able to recharge my batteries a little bit? That did not go well. Like, first, major fight in our marriage was me telling her, don't talk to me when I get home from work. Wow. That's how insensitive I was. Yeah. Another, humiliating example is one time we weren't quite Catholic at the time yet. So we were just kind of exploring churches and things like that. And I remember we went to one church, and the pew, there was like a giant pillar.
Okay.
And like the pew kind of stuck behind the pillar, the very tail end of the pew.
Yeah.
And the rest of the pew was filled up, but it was the only space available. So I sat where I could see and had a clear view of everything going on, and I let her sit behind the pillar. And she did not appreciate that. So anyway, another humiliating example of my insensitivity. But over the years, I've learned that my wife's needs matter.
Yeah.
And that I need to be sensitive to her and get out of myself, get out of my own needs, get out of my own head, and pay attention to her, listen to her when she needs to talk.
Yeah.
And put her needs first.
Yeah.
And to the extent that I've done that, we have a joyful and happy marriage. But of course, we all have our moments where we fall back into selfishness or insensitivity, and it comes back to bite us. But the point is, that's the wonderful thing about marriage, is it calls you out of yourself.
Yeah.
It calls you out of your own needs and your own narcissism, and demands that you pay attention to somebody else. And that can be a very sanctifying thing if you embrace it with the right spirit and the right attitude. If you know, a lot of marriages, unfortunately, that turns into like resentment or criticism or things like that. But it doesn't have to. If you embrace it with a sacrificial spirit, like, it can really sanctify you in a powerful way. So anyway, that's something I learned the hard way, was that my wife's needs matter.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I can see, but the thing is that it's kind of understandable. At first, you got the Leave It to Beaver mentality, where the wife was happy to stay away or to serve the husband.
Wait on me, bring me a beer.
That's right. Or we've got the Wonder Years. I think of the Wonder Years and how he always had scotch, and his wife always filled up scotch, and while he was eating dinner with the kids, she was always, serving and stuff like that. But another thing that just is coming to mind is the idea of that servant leadership, or that servant love, and that Christ provided us the example of, and that we can do for those who matter the most to us, in life, and our wife and our children. And we are called to that sort of servant mentality. Yeah. And we'll have another episode on that. But yeah, thanks for sharing. So these are the difficult things we have learned the hard way.
Yeah, and I just, too, I want to say, like, to anybody who's out there struggling or going through a period of frustration, or a period where dreams are dying and they don't know what's next, or painful moments of humiliation, realize that these are the things that sanctity is made of. Mm-hmm. Like, we have this misguided notion that the saints just woke up saints, and no, like, the struggle is the path, the failures, the struggles, the bitter disappointments in life. These are all opportunities for holiness if we embrace them in the proper way. Why do we live, 80 or so years on this earth? Yeah, it's to grow in holiness, to be faced with challenges that can help us to mature spiritually. I love what Alexander Solzhenitsyn, the great Russian writer, said once about his trials in, like, the Russian prison camps and stuff. He said, "Bless those moments, because what God is really concerned with is the maturity of the human soul. Not our comfort or pleasure in life, as much as He wants us to mature spiritually." Yeah. So to the extent that we embrace these moments of humiliation or pain in life, that's the extent to which we can grow in holiness. That's right. They're gifts, really, if we approach them in the right way.
Agreed. So part of being a man that we like to talk about is the nightcap.
Yes.
And so for today's nightcap, we want to talk about a decanter set. And so
we have a cool vintage example right here.
Yeah, we got one up here in the back, and then we got this one right here.
Got your playing cards right here, your bottle opener, your bottle of scotch here, your glasses. Oh, this is a very cool one. I actually haven't seen too many quite like this, but It's very cool.
Yeah, it is. And something decanter-esque, right? So a decanter like that one back there is you can put any types of scotch, bourbon in it. There's actually in the industry now something called decanter whiskey. And decanter whiskey is plastic bottles of whiskey that taste pretty good, but you would never at a party want to set out a plastic bottle of whiskey. So you put it in a nice crystal decanter, and nobody's any the wiser, and you can enjoy the affordable whiskey with your friends. So
Yes, well, decanter set, it's a very gentlemanly accessory. Consider getting one if you don't have one.
that's right. And as we end every episode,
Be a man, be a saint.